Chapter 7. Humbly asked. The ground floor of glory. Step 7. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. After the long tide of Chapter 6, the step itself is 5 words. You spend months becoming entirely ready, the parliament turning over member by member, the sentries persuaded one wall at a time. And then the whole preparation was for turns out to be a single sentence, sayable in one breath, on one knee or none. People are routinely baffled by the anticlimax. That's it. Ask. That is it. And the proportions are not an accident. They are the lesson. The readiness was the work because readiness is the only work that was ever yours. The opened hand, the stood down guard, the honest tally, the consent. The asking is small because the asking is not labor at all. It is the fall. One more time, in words. The whole motion of this book compressed into a sentence addressed to someone. And the removal is not your work in any degree. It is his, and he has been. This book has said it before and will keep saying it, because no one believes it soon enough. Waiting. Not withholding until the paperwork cleared. Waiting, the way the father in the parable waited, scanning the road, robe already chosen. The delay was never on his end. Nothing is ever on his end. The entire history of grace is the history of a God whose readiness preceded the world, meeting creatures who take decades to open one hand. But the step's freight is not in the asking. It is in the adverb. Humbly. The only adverb in all 12 steps, placed like a keystone at the program's exact midpoint, in the step where the person finally stops managing God and simply asks. The rooms, elders say step 7 is humility, the way step 1 is honesty and step 3 is trust. The program's own commentary spends nearly all its pages on the word. And this book must slow down here, at the risk of trying your patience, because humbly is simultaneously the most necessary and the most dangerous word in the spiritual vocabulary. Necessary, because nothing real happens without it. Dangerous, because nearly everyone reading this book was taught a counterfeit of it, and for some of you the counterfeit did years of damage. So, 2 chapters worth of theology in 3 movements. What humility is not, what it is, and why. This is the disclosure the chapter is built around. It is safe. Safe here and nowhere else. Safe before this God and before no other throne in the universe. What it is not. Humiliation. The 2 words share a root and nothing else. Humiliation is being made small by force or contempt. The shrinking of a person by shame, mockery, exposure, defeat. It always has a victim and it always tells a lie. That you are less than you are. And here this book must speak directly to a particular reader, because the rooms are full of you. The reader for whom religion itself was the humiliation. Who was taught contempt for the self and told it was a virtue. Who learned to grovel and called it prayer. Whose picture of kneeling comes preloaded with a boot. If that is your history, then the word humbly in this step reads like a summons back to the boot, and you have every right to refuse it, and the program is not asking you for it. Hear the tradition at its sanest. You cannot humble yourself below the truth. Humility that says less than what you are is not humility. It is a lie told downward, and the tradition's masters wasted no patience on it. Teresa of Avila, doctor of the church and no one's doormat, settled the definition in 3 words that this chapter will stand on. Humility is truth. Nothing more. Not low opinion. Not self-contempt. Not the performance of smallness. The truth. About what you are. All of it, in both directions at once. And what are you, in truth, per everything this book has established? A creature. Finite, dependent, unfinished, unable to remove your own defects. Step 1's truth, and the parliaments, and the nailed hands. And an image of God, spoken in the sun, held from before the foundations, wanted without being needed, a theophany the wreckage never reached. Chapter 2's truth, exactly as non-negotiable. Humility is standing in both truths at once without flinching from either. Pride flinches from the first, inflates, manages, performs self-sufficiency, runs the humility initiative through the pride department. Shame flinches from the second, deflates, grovels, performs worthlessness, and calls the performance piety. Both are exhausting, because both are acting, and humility, alone among the postures available to you, requires no performance at all, because it is merely standing at your actual size. Which is why the masters all report the same paradox. Humility, expected to feel like diminishment, arrives as relief, the relief of an actor sitting down after decades in a role, the relief of ground. That is the other thing hidden in the word. Humus, soil, ground. The humble person is not the lowest person in the room. She is the most grounded. The one who has finally stopped hovering, at altitude either of grandiosity or of self-erasure, and come down to stand where she actually lives, on the actual earth, at her actual size, which turns out to be the only place a person can be embraced. You cannot hug someone at altitude. Now the disclosure, the piece of this book's deep architecture that Chapter 7 was built to deliver. The reason humility is safe here, before this God, in a way it is safe nowhere else in your experience. Because your wariness about kneeling was never irrational, and this book will not talk you out of it by sentiment. Your wariness is inductive. Every other throne you have ever knelt to, every boss, every institution, every demanding parent, every god of the transaction, every idol of Chapter 1, ran on the same economics. The kneeling fed them. Your smallness was their supply. Tribute flowed up. The throne collected, and whatever came back down came back as wages, conditional, revocable, and priced. You learned, correctly, that surrender is extraction with better lighting, that whoever receives your lowliness is gaining from it, and that a gaining receiver is never fully safe. Bring that whole hard-won education, now, to the God of Chapter 3, and watch it fail to apply. Watch, one clause at a time, the economics that never stop running everywhere else, stop. This God receives without acquiring. Your kneeling adds nothing to him. No supply, no tribute, no augmentation of a life that was feast before the foundations. He does not collect. He cannot collect. There is no lack in him for your smallness to fill, which is precisely why your smallness is safe in his hands and in no other hands anywhere. And now complete the picture with the asymmetry this book has been saving for this exact spot. In the whole traffic between you and God, everything that descends is gift and everything that ascends is welcome, and only one of you is enriched by any of it, and it is never him. The gift comes down. The answer goes up. The answer delights him, really, per Chapter 3, and enriches only you. Sit inside what that means for the posture you have been dreading. Kneeling before this God is the single instance of kneeling in the universe in which nothing is extracted from the kneeler, in which the entire flow of benefit, without remainder, runs toward the one on his knees. Humility before every other throne was tribute. Humility before this throne is positioning, the placing of yourself at the one angle at which a falling gift can land in you. That is all it ever was. The ground floor is not where you are diminished. The ground floor is where the rain collects. Every mystic who ever wrote on humility has been trying to tell you this one economic fact. God's glory has a ground floor, and the door to it is exactly your height. So the asking, when you finally make it, costs you nothing and gains you everything, which is why it can afford to be 5 words, and why the prayers the tradition supplies for this moment are all, essentially, addresses of total handover written in the grammar of total safety. The program's own version, the seventh step prayer, begins, "My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad," and mark the inventory-shaped honesty of that clause. Not the curated offering, not the good parts forward, but the whole tangled weave of chapter 4, handed across as is, spoilage and gold in one crate. The Jesuits have prayed its ancestor for 5 centuries, Ignatius's Susipe. "Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, my entire will, all I have and call my own. Give me only your love and your grace, and I am rich enough." And behind both stands the shortest and greatest of the handover prayers, spoken by a teenager to an angel. "Let it be done unto me according to your word." The consent of Mary, which the tradition has always read as the human posture at its absolute fullest. Not passivity, but the perfected activity of a creature, the total yes that makes room for God to do what only God does. Say whichever one your mouth can manage. Say it badly. The physician has never once graded the consent form on penmanship. What happens next? 2 things, and the program's honesty requires this book to tell you both. The first is removal. Real removal, and stranger than you expect. Almost no one reports the operating theater. Lights, drama, a defect audibly wrenched free. What people report instead, months later, mid-conversation, is absence, the moment a man realizes, with a start, that he cannot remember the last time he rehearsed the resentment, that the situation which reliably detonated him came and went last Tuesday and he noticed it the way you notice weather, that the compulsion to manage the room simply was not at the meeting. Removal by grace is typically noiseless, bloodless, and discovered in the rearview mirror, and this, too, is the asymmetry keeping its promise. The surgery was never on the face, so the face bears no scars. What was taken was only ever the plaster, and plaster comes away clean. The testimony this produces has a distinctive grammar, and the rooms speak it every night without knowing they are reciting one of the oldest genres in the church. When a man stands at a podium and says, "I didn't quit drinking. I've quit 1,000 times. This time something quit it for me." When the story of the removed defect is told with the teller shrugging, pointing past himself, unable to locate his own contribution. That is what the old tradition called the confessio laudis. Confession not of sin but of praise, the public accounting in which the boasting is real and all of it lands on God. It was God. He done it. Augustine wrote 13 books of it. The rooms produce it nightly, in metal folding chairs, in the vernacular. It is what humility sounds like when it finally relaxes into gratitude, and it is the only boasting this book will ever encourage you in. Boast recklessly, extravagantly, at full volume, of what someone else did in you while your only contribution was an open hand. The second thing is the one the prosperity preachers will never tell you, and this book must, because your sobriety may someday depend on your having been told. Some of what you ask removed will not be removed. Not this year. Maybe not in this life. Some thorn, a temperament, a craving's ghost, a weakness that survives every 7th step you make, will persist, and persist, and persist, until the persistence itself becomes a crisis of faith. I asked humbly. I was ready. Why is it still here? You are in the oldest company imaginable. Paul the Apostle. Paul, of the Damascus Road, the man who had been to the 3rd heaven, begged 3 times for the removal of a thorn he never even names, and the removal was refused, and the refusal came with a sentence that has been load-bearing for wounded believers for 20 centuries. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Hear what that answer is and is not. It is not the thorn is good. This book does not walk back 1 inch of its fences, God is not the author of your afflictions and does not manufacture thorns for pedagogy. It is something stranger. That in the economy of a God who works through open hands, the unremoved weakness is where the power gets in. That the persisting shortcoming, precisely by keeping you at the ground floor, keeps you at the one altitude where the rain collects. The rooms know this in their bones. It is why the elders speak, without irony, of the gift of desperation, the strange treasure of a need that never fully closes, which is the only thing that reliably keeps a human being asking. And it is why the program made the reprieve daily. Not because God rations, but because the asking posture is itself the health. Because a creature made for epectasis, for endless stretching forward into an inexhaustible God, was never going to be perfected by arriving. She is perfected by reaching, and the thorn, whatever else it is, keeps the arm extended. Gerald May, near the end of his life, dying of the cancer that would take him, wrote that he had finally stopped asking God to make him whole and started noticing that his brokenness was where the love got in. This book does not ask you to like your thorn. It asks you to suspect, on the testimony of Paul and May and every long-timer who ever thanked God for the desperation that drove him through the doors, that the thorn and the treasure are being kept, for now, in the same field. And now stand back and see where you are, because a threshold is about to be crossed and you should cross it knowingly. 7 steps in. Everything has been vertical and interior. You and your history, you and your secrets, you and your defects, you and your God. The falling, the telling, the readiness, the asking, all of it the reconstruction of one axis, the Godward one, and it was right that it came first. You cannot give from an empty account, and the account needed the deposits of these 7 chapters. But the inventory of chapter 4 had a third column, and it has been waiting patiently this whole time. Names. The people your history happened to. Because it did not happen in a sealed room. The wreckage had a blast radius, and the radius had faces in it. The daughter, the brother, the friend, the wife, the colleague, the stranger. The next movement of the program turns you around, at last, to face them, to list them, to become willing, that word again. The Parliament will have opinions, and then to go to them. And this book must tell you now that its next chapter is the longest and heaviest it will ask you to carry, because the amends road runs in 2 directions, and the second direction leads into the dark. Not only the harm you did, but the harm done to you. The pages of the inventory this book has been carrying gently since chapter 4. The wounds that were never your wrongs, the things that should never have happened to anyone. The program brings you to the door of the people you hurt. This book, walking beside it, must also bring you to the door of what hurt you, and it has promised you, since its first chapter, that when it finally stood at that door it would not blink, and would not explain, and would not leave. That door is next.